Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our first panel discussion. The theme of this discussion is e-governance for effective governments. And we have worked very hard, and we are very lucky that we have such a good panel here today. And the first panelist is Professor Pankaj Setia. He is the Institute Chair Professor of Information Systems in IIM Ahmedabad. He's also the founding chair for the Center for Digital Transformation. His research interests include IT-enabled organizational capabilities, computational models for sentiment analysis and IT governance and strategy, open source innovations, and business analytics and artificial intelligence. The second on our list is Professor Venkatesu. Professor Venkatesu is a professor in the Department of Political Science, School of Social Sciences, University of Hyderabad. His specializations include public policy analysis, public governance, election studies, and civil social movements, public policy, governance, and affirmative action policy. And representing the industry is Devashish Dasgupta. Devashish Dasgupta is the Corporate and Government Affairs Head at Hindustan Unilever Limited. He has over 31 years experience in corporate affairs and public policy across various industries, which include healthcare, FMCG, and the consulting domain. And last but far from least, our moderator today is Dr. Deepak Dhayanidhi. He is an associate professor from the strategic management area in IIM Kozhikode. Over to you, sir, and he'll lead the discussion from here on.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this panel this afternoon. And we have three eminent speakers here. We'll give each of them 15 minutes to talk, right? So we can start with Professor. So we give each of them around 15 minutes to speak, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the 45-minute mark. Is that okay, EPS?
Yes, sir. We can give them 15 to 20 minutes.
Sure. Okay. Okay. So you can take 15 to 20 minutes, dear panelists. And may I ask Professor Pankaj Setia to start us off this afternoon?
So Ashish, anything specific? I don't know what we were talking about. Anything specific you want me to talk about?
Yes, sir.
On the, I mean, any specific questions that you would like me to address?
Yes.
Or you just...
Yes, sir.
So
we do.
I think some of the questions that we would like you to take on, Professor Pankaj, would be: what are the government's broad concerns in the e-governance policy?
Okay, that's good. I think that's fine. Yeah. So I'm going to speak at extempore. So let me say a few things around e-governance and maybe start by talking about governance itself. Largely, when we say e-governance, we talk about, we think about government, but in general, governance is not necessarily restricted to the government itself. And so when you think about governance, what is governance is really a process of allocating decision rights. And I want to approach this topic from that perspective. If you go theoretically into the process of governance, the governance is a process of deciding who will decide what. So it's a meta decision-making process in some manners. And if we say electronic governance or using digital technologies for governance, in the Indian context, we are often saying that decision rights would be managed digitally. There is a specific reason or a context in which the government uses this term of e-governance, and we are really thinking about corruption as one that comes on top of mind, bureaucracy, which means slow movement of decisions. It also might mean lack of clear policies and procedures. All of these things, if we want to understand, as a single, source of information or as a single element, would come down to, again, the problems that are allocated with decision right management. And let me try and share my screen. Hopefully that will be okay. to talk about what that would mean in the case of e-government, let's say. I'm glad that we are in the era where we can do these panels with the computer in front of us and ability to see the screen. So I'm going to share it. Hopefully you can see the screen here.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So the idea of governance is the idea of, like I said, allocation of decision rights. And when we say technology, we are talking about a lot of people, individuals in a society that are interacting with each other and so on. So there are a lot of interactions that happen in an economy, and often these interactions, these could be business interactions, these could be public interactions, and then there is a broad scope of government. Government is nothing but a collective of individuals as well, which means that people, through their different reasons, create the government, and government for different reasons shapes or monitors these transactions, these activities between the individual citizens. And so that is broadly the setup in which I would like to analyze this issue of e-governance, which means that as individuals transact with each other, they need the government so there is a fair process. One doesn't get cheated. If I interact with someone and there is a debate, there is a discussion, somebody doesn't pay me, somebody takes undue advantage of me, treats me unfairly, I need the government to enforce the laws. I need the government to put in place the systems that would ensure that the transactions I'm engaging in are fair and others. Government is also needed because one person, because of whatever unfair advantage, may try to overcome or overtake public properties or things that are not in the collective good. So for an example, if we collectively decide that we need a park because the green spaces in the park are overall good for the health of citizens, and somebody says no park, I'm going to build the building there, that is a violation of the overall public good for which we might think about putting the government in place as well. The idea is that the citizens together for their own well-being need a government. They create a government, and government in turn provides them the framework or the set of rules that will be for the overall collective good. The reason this is important is because often in the discussions of e-governance or the digital governance I've seen, we've missed out the fact that the government is something that is there for a reason, and which also means that the government may not be required for many reasons, or the government may not be required to make decisions for many reasons. If we understand or if we think about this problem from that perspective, the introduction of digital technologies is really a process of inducing or reducing government from the public life. If we just take that perspective of increasing or decreasing governance or government, sometimes it is a process of transforming that is called, but that largely would be either increasing or decreasing government. How does digital technology help do that? I mentioned this whole idea of decision rights. By creating a government, individuals are agreeing to give decision rights to a smaller collective of people to make decisions on many things. Decisions related to how will we protect our borders, decision related to how will we enforce laws regarding the public spaces, like I mentioned about the park, decisions about how we would decide what are the activities for public good, whether consumption of marijuana, for example, is a good thing, bad thing, should be outlawed or not, whether we would have liquor allowed or not. And then it becomes very complex because in subgroups of that public, those things would differ. So Gujarat might ban the consumption of liquor, some other state may not, and so on and so forth. So collective of people together might have very different government. The problem of decision rights and why e-governance and everything matters is that we are now formalizing the process of making decisions through digital technologies, which means there are a couple of things happen based on that. One, it becomes standardized, which means one decision taken at any other place will be the same as another decision taken in another place. And even if it is not the same, it will be recorded, and it will not be something that can be misinterpreted. It is what it is. You can record it, you can see it, you can evaluate it, and you can not just evaluate it, but you can also analyze it with all the data analytics and everything that we are going to make sure that the decisions are happening. This is very important in the Indian context because for a long time, this whole beast of corruption happened because people would not disclose even what was going on. So decision rights are being standardized by the government through the use of digital technology. I'm writing a couple of things here that are happening. There is obviously the control, but there are a couple of things that happen when we do e-governance. There is standardization, like I said. There is monitoring, which means if somebody does something, it is clearly in the public domain, you can disclose it, you can make data available, and monitoring is broadly possible, not just by a few group of people as a bureaucrats, but also by a wide group of scientists, researchers, and broader public, and that are a lot of very many initiatives. We have seen that. The decision making is optimized in the sense of all the analytics that can be done, and the decision making can be automated as well, which means once you apply for certain things, a lot of processes go in automatically. There is the idea of DigiLocker, for example, that the government, the Digital India Initiative, and the idea of this CoWIN portal that we create. All of these gave this idea of automation at a level where activities are automated. So for example, go back 50 years or even 30 years. If you needed to get a certificate of something from the government agency, that is something the killer of any particular thing. And in this era, we are talking about CoWIN and downloading our certificates as a proof of entry into a park. At least that's what I've seen in Gujarat. If you want to enter into a park, you need to show your certificate of that you are vaccinated, and you can download it from CoWIN portal at the click of a button. Just think about that particular use case happening a couple of years ago, or a couple of maybe 20-30 years ago. Anything getting a certificate from government was probably the best way to kill a particular thing from happening. And now here we are using that same process to solve as complex a problem as as a pandemic, and facilitating our luxuries, our joys, such as entering into a park with that. So broadly, I think, not to take too much of your time, just summarizing the whole thing. Government or e-governance in general is a process whereby individuals create a group of people for certain public activities that we think should be done for our own good, either in terms of interactions with others or interactions with a broader public landscape. It could be public parks, it could be public spaces, it could be national security, it could be anything that is a collective good, if you may. And for that, we need some decision rights. For that, we need a lot of decision rights. We need to allocate them. That process is messy. That process is confusing. That process is often not standardized. It may not be monitored. It may not be optimized, and it may not be automated. Those lead to a lot of problems. And so when we talk e-governance, we are resolving many of those problems by standardizing, automating, optimizing, and monitoring that. That is the basic framework on which I would build. I want to talk about more, and I hope we will have more conversations around this idea of increasing and decreasing government as we go forward. I've kind of given a lot more, I think, than we can discuss in the next few minutes, but hopefully this lays the framework for what I would like to say.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Pankaj. I think this really sets the tone for us to discuss further. And a few questions come to mind, but I think we'll park it for later in the session. At this juncture, can I ask Professor Venkatesu to please come in and talk about what he sees as the governance challenges facing India? Professor Venkatesu.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Deepak, and the organizers of this conference, especially Ashish and his team, for giving this opportunity to interact with the young minds from different parts of the country. Uh, the, uh, so our sense of understanding of the concept of governance from the conceptual or theoretical aspect is that the concept of governance is a hybridized one. The concept of governance is a multi-jurisdictional, and it is consisting of the pluralistic stakeholders. Why it is a hybridized, multi-jurisdictional, and pluralistic stakeholders is because basically time and again we have been asking this question that the participants that what is the difference between government and governance. Some people say that it is a synonym. If it is a synonym, then why do you want to use another instead of using the government? Why do you want to use the governance? That is the basic question. And you see, recent times, even the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been talking of less government and more governance. More governance means that has been indicating something different context than the government. So this context is the multi-institutional context, that is the neo-institutional context. The neo-institutional context essentially consisting of the institutions like state, civil society, and market, and the relationship among these institutions. Say, for instance, the relationship between the state and market is essentially it is a public-private partnership. The relationship between market and civil society is reflecting in the form of the corporate sector social responsibility, and the relationship between the state and the citizen is some set of rights and entitlements. So it look at basically a citizen. Citizen is having the mandatory constitutional rights. So that is the broader context where we are trying to look at the concept of governance or public governance, and we look at e-governance, the concept of the e-governance as an instrument. E-governance itself is not an end. E-governance is an instrument. We give it as an instrumental value. See, once upon a time you had the paper. Today you are having the computerized instrument. That instrument is much, probably more faster than the earlier instruments which were used in order to provide the governance or government. So having defined that, then why do you want governance in Indian context, and what are the challenges? Basically, in the process of conducting field-based studies as well as the reviewing, surveying of the literature on the concept on policies, we have found that one of the major lacuna gap in the Indian context is that lack of data. Essentially, that today the world is revolving around the concept of big data, but this authentic data is one of the crucial issue. Whether during the time of the planning era or even now also the Niti Aayog period, when you look at even the ranking of the sustainable development goals and several other things, even for that matter, recent controversial issue which has been going on a lot of discussion on this, including of the caste in the census. That is the contemporary issue in this age of the e-governance, and that is one of the important serious issue in terms of taking of the policy decision. The kind of the way it has been replied to the Supreme Court is indicating that it is a lack of data is the one important. Then ruling party centric data and political motivations. Whatever the data that has been gathered, whenever there has been a change of the government, they are generating their own data, and as per their own data, they have been taking the policy decisions. Then another challenge is the lack of infrastructure for digital governance to promote citizen-centric governance. When you look at the second Administrative Reforms Commission report on citizen-centric governance, it requires a lot of infrastructure. One among them is the providing of the e-governance infrastructure, but that is a major lacuna. As on today, the e-governance mechanism has been existing only within the corporate, market, and state. But when it comes to the citizen has been excluded or marginalized. Then lack of capacity building for manpower and digital governance is another major issue. We don't have the required manpower to speed promotion of the e-governance mechanism. And of course, another important thing is that digital divide. This is the very, very serious issue even in the age of digital divide. You know, at one point of time, when the agrarian economy was prevailing in the social relations, there was a landlord and landless agriculture labor. When the industrial revolution was dominant, then there was a division of the capitalist and the labor. And today, digital haves and digital have not is the phenomena. That even in the morning also, the keynote speaker has highlighted during the pandemic crisis, it was the only 8% of the children has got the accessibility for the online classes. What about the 92% of the students, especially the marginalized areas like rural areas, tribal areas, urban slums? That is the another serious problem that has been existing in the Indian context. So in order to overcome these set of issues, what has been the attempt which is being made by some of the state governments like Andhra Pradesh? Andhra Pradesh that has designed the village secretariat. At the village secretariat, it has recruited a few lakhs of the functionaries in order to provide the services to the local people. That is to the beneficiaries, that is citizen or the voter, in the form of services to the various kinds of services. So this today the services are being digitalized. You know, there are at least this Navaratnas are the basis for this delivering of the welfare services, and these are in order to deliver the Navaratnas, it has been provided a digital technology, the application of the digital technology. Of course, Aadhaar is the hub of e-governance implementation of the welfare schemes in Andhra Pradesh. Though whatever the judgment that has been existing by the Supreme Court of India on the question of the privacy and whatever the things, but today Aadhaar inevitably it has become a potential instrument. Without Aadhaar, there is no e-governance mechanism. It has been emerging the phenomenon at the grassroots level. So therefore, the whatever the data which is being generated by the series of the people, whether they're the village secretariat staff, the assistants of the various departments, and the volunteers, each volunteer is representative for the 50 families in a village, and whatever the data that is while applying this household mapping technique, and that household technique map is consisting of gender, age, assets, occupation, and location, etc. And this what the household data is being linked to the Aadhaar. So Aadhaar is the, as I said, that it is as a inevitable phenomena, and on the basis of the Aadhaar, it is also linked with the bank linkages, bank account. So then services, that is services which are being delivered or being the beneficiaries on the one hand, and kind of various services which are being delivered to these beneficiaries is being documented, is digitalized, through using of the various networks. And for each of these services, app has been created. Say for example, if you want agricultural services, there is a service. Say for example, Raitu Bandhu or Raitu Parosa is a financial direct transfer of the amount to the farmer account. So for that also there is a what is called as, there is a separate app. For midday meals, there is a separate app. For distribution of the school uniform, there is a separate app. For the distribution of the textbooks, notebooks, and kit, shoe, etc., there has been each of these items, there has been a separate app. Even for the cleaning and then to oversee, monitor the toilets in the schools, there is a separate app. Even to look at the midday meal kitchen, there has been a separate app. So this for wide, almost 540 services are being delivered to the secretariat with these officials, with these assistants, and for each of the service there has been a separate app. Today, the e-governance in Andhra Pradesh has become an app-centric governance. So this is the framework. This is the kind of framework that has been evolving when you look at the e-governance practices from the empirical point of view in Andhra Pradesh. That is biometric. That is the beneficiary is supposed to provide the evidence that they have received the service, biometric in the form of a biometric. Then that biometric is being recorded in the form of app. App is because of that volunteer is being provided some scanning machine as well as the app, and in that scanned one is supposed to be entered into the through mail while using the Android mobile, and then computerization of the data at the village secretariat. The computerized data at the village secretariat is being forwarded to the mandal level officer, that is a block level officer, and block level officer to district level officer, and district level officer to the state level government and union government. Because some of the apps are initiated by the state government, some few of them are by the union government. Say for example, women and child welfare services, it is the union government app has been there. Anganwadi, a separate app has been there. So that is the one. So the biometric, there are this 250,000 volunteers are there. Each volunteer is supposed to take care of 50 households. The volunteers are being given tasks and monitored by the assistants in the village secretariat. Volunteers are being monitored by the concerned departments. Say for example, health department will be monitoring the health assistant. The rural development department monitoring the assistant of the rural development. The electricity department monitoring the energy assistant. The fisheries department will be monitoring the fisheries assistant through online. So right from the volunteer to the chief minister office, the digital connection has been well established while taking the evidence from the beneficiary. Where the evidence, only one evidence that is from whether from the farmer, women self-help group, or a child who is going to the school, all old age pensions, widow pensions, social security pensions for the various rural artisans, all of them, the common evidence that they have received the service is the thumb impression. So that is therefore the service, the information is, there has been a flow of the information right from the citizen to beneficiary to the chief minister office. So however, there are certain problems even in the e-governance. E-governance has solved many of the problems like corruption, transparency, speedy, quick service delivery, etc. However, see this, there has been a time limit, time bound. In the rural areas, the agriculture labor, the working people, they, especially in terms of the rice distribution, public distribution system, as well as the pensions, they give 1 or 2 days or 1st and 2nd of every month. If they are not there during that period, and almost they are, it is an horrible in the life of a poorest of the poor people who are supposed to receive. If they are out of station, or if they are engaged with work, or if they are forgotten, then there is no possibility. They say that we are sending the communication to through the mobile phone. But many people still are not possessing the mobile phone, and workers who have been working in the agricultural field, having a look at whenever there has been a message, then it is another difficult problem. Probably the experts in this area of this is one of the practical difficulty at the receiving end, by a citizen that needs to be addressed. They won't look at the message, each and every message. We are all privileged people. We are the white collar people, so that we are able to see each and every minute. Without mobile phone, our life has become pathetic. But whereas if they spend hours together by a labor working class, is it possible for them to earn their bread and butter, their source of the livelihood? It's a big stake. So that is the one of the serious problem. Then the lack of proper training to the volunteers on apps, operation of the apps, and then creation of the number of apps, the series of apps, double-digit number, triple-digit number of apps that has been creating a lot of confusion among the people. So there must be a single window. Of course, that has been channelized single window at the Gram Panchayat level by the digital assistant who has been channelizing. Then again, I said that in the tribal areas also it has been a problem. So now finally, there are these questions, whether this e-governance is facilitating for the centralization or decentralization. Decentralization is, that means empowering of the citizen. So this, when we look at the information flow chart, you are confirming from the beneficiary and it is linked to the chief minister office. But whether there is a possibility or the village secretary level itself to question by a citizen about their rights and entitlements. Therefore, whether this e-governance mechanism is supply driven or is it a demand driven? If it is a demand driven, it is supposed to be citizen centric. If it is supply centric and ruling party centric, will be a obviously supply oriented. So therefore, another important aspect is that empowerment of the empowering of the citizen, or is it a status quo? So empowerment is creating some set of a dynamism, creativity, thinking process, thought process, and questioning of the system, etc. But who are there to speak? Who are there to speak? At least Gram Sabha is supposed to be a platform where their citizen is supposed to directly participate. But whether this e-governance mechanism is facilitating for the conducting of the Gram Sabha is another challenge. And then power dynamics, whether this e-governance is a power to the ordinary common citizen, or is it a power to those people who are already enjoying the power? So that is the serious problem. Is it a power? It is another source for those people who have been privileged sections in the society is another question that needs to be addressed. So these are some of my issues and questions. I stop here. Probably in the process of interaction, we will be having a discussion. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Professor Venkatesh. So you raise a lot of obviously very important points on the basis of the ground experience. A lot of it in Andhra Pradesh. You bring up points on that. There are still places where e-government hasn't gone, like how efficiently the Gram Sabhas or the Gram Panchayats can work. So thank you very much. And I think already you've also brought about certain points about monitoring, where some things which the service delivered at an individual citizen level can be monitored all the way up to the Chief Minister's office in the state, which kind of links up well with what Professor Pankaj was talking about as monitoring being one of the key functions of e-governance. Thank you. Can I request Devashish Dasgupta to please come in now and talk to us, focusing on how e-governance is impacting business, the ease of doing business in India.
So thank you very much, Professor Deepak. Thank you, Ashish, Geetika, and the entire organizing team for inviting me to speak amongst such eminent panelists who just spoke before me. And I think they've laid out the topic and the whole issue very, very clearly from a government e-governance perspective. What I will like to touch on are a few areas from a business perspective. And I think we all understand that all of these things don't exist in isolation. I always say that government, business, and civil society, they all kind of work at some point, and there is a midpoint, a sweet spot between them. And therefore it's extremely important that there are rules, they play by rules, and these rules have to be framed by somebody in form of policies that typically government forms. And there should be a mechanism by way of which these policies are then kind of executed, looked at, and improved upon wherever needed be, because challenges do come in all the time. And I start very briefly with the most recent topic, which I think both my panelists have alluded to, which is to do with COVID. And I bring in the business perspective. I just go back to March of 2020, when due to this COVID pandemic, the government declared a lockdown, and rightfully so. And the impact of that to the business could have been very, very significant, because lockdown would mean that nobody can move in and move out, and therefore there could have been a sudden stoppage of every form of business activity. Now, obviously, that happened for a few days because everybody was learning at that space. But the sense that one got was, because the government's mechanism were strong, the technology behind it, or the ability to build technology as as the issue was being fixed was so good and so strong, whether it was the Arogya Setu app that came in and the various things that came in with the Arogya Setu, particularly about contact tracing and contact tracking, that really helped. So, after about 7 or 8 days, we were able to let our factories run in a manner that was permissible by the government at that time in terms of social distancing and others. But a company like ours, which has over 33 owned factories and exactly the same number of third-party manufacturing operations across the country, would have been a huge issue if we were not able to kind of work in some way or the other. And it was not only that, there was the whole ecosystem around it, which was about the suppliers sending their raw materials into the factories and being able to then, for us to able to finish the products and then sending it out to our distributors and the sales points. So, we saw in this period, in the first phase of COVID, and then we saw it in 2021, in the second phase of COVID, how quickly, technology and e-governance helped build very strong systems that in this year, in 2021, nobody lost really any time in terms of the manufacturing work that was being done. There were challenges, of course. There were challenges of interstate transport getting hit, because we saw in COVID-20 in the second wave that it was impacting certain states more than other states. So Maharashtra had a huge issue at one point in time, and then when Maharashtra was recovering, Delhi went through another challenge. And therefore, there were issues which the government was kind of dealing with, whether, for example, I give you a live example of whether Maharashtra would allow goods trucks to come in from other states into the state, because that would have also carried a possibility of COVID. Now, but these things were all sorted and solved because the mechanism was strong. There was a view to kind of solve these things through, like I said, the contact tracing and through other mechanisms to be able to ensure that the business could survive. And therefore, when we see the industry numbers, we saw while the mid-quarter of last year saw a dip in terms of numbers, the same period this year saw that the businesses were absolutely stable, and many businesses actually kind of did much better. So that was one of the first points I wanted to kind of bring in, because that was very recent for us. The other very important point, which is of course absolutely a landmark change that happened in terms of policy, was the introduction of GST, and obviously there were a lot of skepticism around GST, because GST was something that was going to subsume a lot of taxes into it. Some of them were central taxes, some of them were state taxes, some of them were local taxes. Some revenues were directly going into certain parts of the government, and some were not. Now, to build this in, first at the government level, to be able to have that understanding between the state and the central government on one side, but also to ensure that the businesses kind of could understand that and work through that, was, I think, a landmark kind of thing that happened in this country. And while, of course, we saw that while GST was rolled out on a particular date, there were certain challenges that came up immediately in terms of the technology infrastructure. But what was good was the robustness of the technology was such that it was something that could get fixed. It did not completely collapse. It got fixed, and it kind of went through and worked on. So therefore, I would say that that was something that really changed the way businesses are happening today. In many ways, businesses, of course, have become much more transparent because of that. The revenue leakages have come down significantly. We've seen GST collections go up all the time. Of course, having said that, there are challenges. And one of the challenges I would allude to and just share an experience from an HUL perspective, but which is also common to a lot of companies. In the past, the way businesses were set up were to kind of avail tax incentives in these backward areas, or as they were defined as backward areas. whether it was Baddi in Himachal Pradesh or Silvassa or Pondicherry or these places or parts of Uttarakhand. And companies invested huge amounts of money because that's where they felt that that's the best way of building the business therein. But when GST came in, the big challenge that came up was that everything was subsumed, and therefore all the benefits of these excise holidays and stuff like that kind of suddenly disappeared or seemed to have disappeared. Now again, at that stage, the government kind of was open to having conversations, and to a point where there was a scheme that was implemented, which is called the budgetary support scheme, which was in a way of central government reimbursing some of the losses that the companies would have faced in terms of not getting those exemptions, and to be able to kind of get through that. Now, nobody estimated that because nobody had thought from that perspective at the time. I think when the GST was being implemented, what would be the number, what would be the amount that would get impacted, and there were huge challenges that companies faced, and most companies did then kind of come through with this budgetary support scheme, which is now implemented by the DPIIT in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Through which there is a mechanism to kind of you get back your money, some of these lost taxes. So the reason I'm bringing this point is that while there are governance mechanisms, there will always be challenges because of certain rules and policies that were framed before that or during that period, and therefore it's important that all these parties come together and talk and come up with a way to continuously improve the governance. And that's only possible when there is the interest of everybody put together. We all know that in short term people lost money. For example, not only lost, but we lost a lot of working capital, got stuck. But we realized the importance of this scheme in the longer run, and therefore we stayed the course to ensure that we would kind of work through in that space. So that was one of the areas that kind of we worked in, and then I can talk a bit more on that if there are any questions around that. One other issue that I would want to also bring in terms of e-governance is another big landmark work done by the government is on the procurement, the government procurement that has now happened. It's done through a portal called the Government e-Marketplace, the GEM portal. And now, as we speak, almost all purchases, either by state or central government or any agencies of these governments, are all procured through that portal. Now, what has therefore happened is that there is a possibility for getting the right goods, the best prices, mechanism in terms of payment having been done in time, not much working capital getting stuck, and more importantly for companies like us, where we have a huge portfolio of products, and these are products which are in many times counterfeited. And the challenge that we used to always have was that in some remote part of the country you would have a Lifebuoy being manufactured locally and then getting sold, or maybe a food item getting produced and sold, or tea getting sold under the brand of HUL's brands. Now, because of I think some of these schemes, whether the GEM portal and others, all of these suppliers and sellers will have to be on one portal, on one space where they are identified, because they have a trace, they are connected with their Aadhaar numbers and their GST numbers and everything else. So there is a much stronger mechanism or governance measure to able to kind of bring these people to book as and when they kind of default and find these challenges. So these are areas that I think we are struggling with, or we're working around with the government, but we're still kind of seeing how it works. And just the final point that I would want to bring in here is also the fact that with the digital technology, not only it's the role of the government to do that, but it's also the role of the private sector to work around in those spaces. And how do you ensure that the technology that companies like ourselves have built, we are able to kind of share with the government and enable some of them to be used in various mechanisms. So one example could be, in this whole space of plastic waste management, and the government has been very keen to kind of, be in the front and center of removing as much of plastic waste, or at least ensuring that recycling happens. A company like ours has reached a point where we today are collecting and recycling more plastic than we are actually generating. And obviously that we've been able to do because of the technology interface that we've created and the partners that we've created. And now, we are able to share some of these practices with municipal corporations in different cities and states. We have regular communication with, let's say, the Central Pollution Control Board or the State Pollution Control Boards, and we are able to learn from each other. So I think, that's the last point that I wanted to kind of make, how, it's not a one-way street for us to only expect government to only do this for us, but how things that we have developed, how can we work and share with government as well as through government to other stakeholders. So I'll pause here and happy to take questions from here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Devashish. I think you spoke about some of the things which HUL is doing, HUL is faced with, which kind of are in what Professor Pankaj Sethia was saying, are the optimizing and maybe automating aspects of it. Very interesting, and thank you for sharing these things with us. So I just want to bring in Professor Pankaj into the conversation. He had laid out a very simple framework for us to think about governance, in terms of the interactions and the players involved in it. It's just a couple of things which I would like your comments, Professor Pankaj. One is, the role of monitoring, optimizing, and automation. How do these three things work in tandem or together, or is it something linked over time? If you could comment on that part, that is one. And second thing is what Professor Venkatesh was talking about in terms of how digitalization of government policy, what are the challenges? The challenges, Professor Venkatesh brought up a lot of challenges. So, I wanted your thoughts on how those challenges could be observed or could be addressed. He was talking in terms of the digital divide, in terms of capacity building to ensure that all of these things actually work. Professor Pankaj?
I'm glad to talk. But I would also say that my comments may be very different and my perspective is different.
May I quickly button Professor Pankaj? In fact, the framework you laid out, I think it was very useful for us to understand, okay, this is what governance is, because, I am one of those lost people who, to what Professor Venkatesh said, I tend to think that a lot of e-governance is a lot of apps. So, you kind of help me understand, oh, it's not that, it is a framework of how interactions happen.
No. So I'm going to make two levels of comments then, if we are starting at that level of apps and everything. One is, so apps obviously don't matter. That's, that's just, that's a very base level where I can say that's not how we should think about it. Any systemic student should not think about governance to be apps and stuff. More important, comment that I want to make, and like I said, it might be controversial and you may not understand, or you may not, appreciate, people may not like what, the kind of views that I might express. Let me express those views just to say, I don't think we should care about government that much. E-governance is important, but but PM, I think Professor Venkatesh, you mentioned that less government, more governance. Government should become less. It should matter less in our lives. We often have this view that we are going to, we need government to help to do this, to do that. Government is just something we create. should not be our parent. Government has a role to play in a society. Government has a role to play in terms of regulating, in terms of providing aid where some is required. There are people who are weaker. Digital divide you mentioned. I have published on digital divide. I'm passionate about it. I don't want people. I do work on slavery and other things. There are real problems in the world where we need the government for. There are national security concerns. We need the government for. What is government? Government is us collectively saying there are problems of public good. There are problems that are collectively important to me, to us. Sometimes those are local. In Gujarat, people might have like I said before, they might have an aspiration that people should not drink liquor, right? That may not be the aspiration of that. So in Gujarat, they build a government which says, okay, we're not going to allow liquor, for example. Collectively as a country, we would say we want to be safe. We don't want people throwing bombs and doing stuff. We collectively say we want national security. It is an important problem for us. Government is going to be essential to providing some service, but government is not something that should be institutionalized in the daily life. Less of government, the better off humanity is. When does less government happen? Less government doesn't mean that you are going to allow people to stab each other, to do unlawful activities. And no, on the contrary, less government will happen when people actually are so well behaved that they don't need government. That's the underlying point. Now, if we continue to say the government provide more services to the poor, why should poor be in that situation? How long will we continue to have that kind of poverty? How long will we continue to need people who need government services? The government's job is to build the next level of architecture, which will enable people to build their own self up, to build their own companies, to build their own capabilities, to get the riches. And that is happening too. And I think that is happening. And Abhishek at Digital India, the MD CEO, he was there with us a couple of weeks ago. And he did mention, he spoke to my class, and one of the things he said is the kind of APIs he has built are opening up to let creation of companies like Zerodha. That's where I'm excited. That's where I'm fascinated. The people might come from very humble backgrounds. I come from very humble background. A lot of people come from very humble backgrounds. Their goal should not be to get into, continue to be in humble backgrounds. You need to then rise up. You need to make others, take others up. That's how the society is going to move up. When people move themselves up and moves others up, government is going to be required all the time. But we are not going to depend, we should not depend that much on government. Government should not be a parent to us. Government will always be required. There will always be cases where we will be conflicting with others. There will be cases where we would find that, this is unjust to me, this is unjust to someone else. We're going to find injustices all the time. But I think it's high time we should think, privatization of Air India happened, right? So part of it is we should learn from that process, that we know we as individuals are going to run our own institutions. It's about how collectively you manage things. It is about collective. Collective mein kabhi bhi, you are not going to be very efficient in collective. Managing large collectives has been hard. You become efficient, effective by smaller units and entities. Some of you may know, I came from US after 17 years. One of the case I used to bring to class was 8-member company, 8-people company trying to make an online system where people can fight any tickets that are given to them, or any other law related help. 8 people are thinking of challenging the entire legal system and lawyers in US. The point is, you have to become more efficient, you have to become more effective, you have to create a lot of value. And the government is a source of providing foundational services to create that value. Ultimately, there has always, like I said, to be a role for the government, but we have to think about how are we going to monitor, optimize, and automate and standardize in a more effective manner. And that's where digital technologies are coming. You don't need so many people now, which you would now realize. There was a time in this country where there were people to count currency notes in banks. All their life, what they would do is they would come and count the currency notes, because the banks have a lot of currency notes, they need to be counted and managed and monitored. And then you have machines that would count it on the fly. You don't need a person to do it. You removed one people, that's fine, right? I mean, you removed a job, and a lot of people might be concerned about that. But effectiveness comes in when you build technology to automate, to standardize, to monitor. In general, that is true in many organizations. The government is now realizing it, and I'm glad it is. And the kind of things that have happened in Indian government are sometimes very exemplary. They're very good. But I think we have to understand that we have to ourselves shift our focus to think about the government differently. We create the government for a purpose, and we should not forget that purpose. Government is there to regulate, to make sure things don't happen unfairly, nobody's treated wrong, there's no injustice, there's no outside threats, and so many other things that should happen. The government should not be in the business. We should not be seeking help. I mean, we have to seek help where it is needed in the digital divide, but these people whom we are trying to help are the people who create the government. Who are we helping them? I mean, in some sense, that's the people who should be owning the government, not getting help from us. And we don't have to fight, oh, you help this. They own it. What are we talking about helping someone? It's their product too. Government is a very idealistic concept in that sense. It belongs equally to everyone. And so I think it should not be an elitist government. It should not be an elite's government. It should not be an elite argument in the government. Government is there for everyone. But it is there to ensure transactions are fair. Now, it's easier said theoretically. There are a lot of challenges in doing so, because when you talk about injustice, there is the idea of digital divide. People don't have basic. So I understand there is a need to support and all that. I've been passionate about those topics, but we have to, at the back of our mind, be clear that that's only temporary. Sooner or later, these guys have to come up. They have to start their own companies. You have to build a strong India. You have to build it by getting the people to be strong themselves, to own their government, and to make sure we do it in as professional and as fair a manner as we can. That's the goal.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Pankaj. There are larger things at stake here. The efficiency improvements, whereby some of the mundane tasks get automated. All of that is simply setting the ground. Is that a fair way to summarize what you're saying?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, Professor.
You're asking me to say that. How do we summarize the different level of doing stuff? Is that the question?
No, it's fine. No, I was just
No, I can comment on it. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what you are asking.
Yeah.
Can you rephrase?
If you could comment, please. Yeah.
No, I think so. Yeah, the thing is, if you're thinking e-government, building of apps, there is a lot of that is, there are a lot of those things that are, if you get into the digital, technologies literature, which is where I am, you're building capabilities at different levels. You're building different digital capabilities. And so, there is data that is widely accessible. There would be apps that would make it accessible. You would go on the top of it. You would make the APIs that would open the data and everything. And I think all of those are great innovations. What I'm triggering is, I think what we heard earlier regarding helping the businesses. I think Devashish was talking about that. And I think that's where we probably want to think a little bit more. I think if anything, I would say is how can e-governance go beyond and help people create companies and all. You have to deliver digital services at the basic level. Those are required. But I think beyond that, with the digital and the electronic revolution, the revolution is when you think about creating capabilities that help people create more advanced capabilities. That is the foundation. That is the good government that would happen. And I think we are already doing some of that by creating these APIs, making it open to people, allowing people to build companies on the core and architecture and the data. That's where I'm ushering. That's where I'm making that e-governance to be focused on a top line. I mean, there has to be a bottom line, not to ignore that. Not that there will people not need service. I mean, all of us need services. I need services. I need pay my tax and get, all that is, but that's something we have to understand. That's a base infrastructure. That's a basic level of expectation that the government has to fulfill. What I'm urging people to think about the government as a facilitator of large scale building of new business enquiries. Well, the reason why I say that is important is, how long will we continue to follow what US did? How long would you continue to build on models that China has or everything? I mean, if India is unique, which we claim we are, we should build that in terms of our technologies and products. And that would happen only when people from the very grassroots come up, when people who have their own aspirations and ambitions come up, and we facilitate that. That's what my passion and interest would be. Let us have people from all walks of India, from the humblest and the lowest root, not just give them the basic facilities, not just bridge the digital divide, but to help them create companies which will elevate regions and populations and communities. That's where I'm urging people to look at.
Thank you very much, Professor Pankaj. Thank you very much for setting the ambition level right. I just want to go to Professor Venkatesu, and I wanted to ask you, sir, if you could speak a little bit more about examples of various Indian states where e-governance schemes have been well received by the citizens. You had pointed out some of the problems and some of the challenges which are out there in terms of capacity building, digital divide, and so on. So we'll talk of some examples across Indian states or within AP itself, where we have some good success stories.
Yeah, as far as success stories are concerned, there are plenty of them. Say, for example, the public distribution system in Chhattisgarh and Telangana. One of our students has been doing his PhD on that aspect. He has brought out the improvement, the quite effective delivery of this service to the low-income groups in the society, and then promptly reaching it to the people, deserving people, and then cutting the shortcut methods which are being used by whether it is officials or politicians' interventions or making some corruption, rent-seeking behavior, etc. That is the one, and another one is this One Nation, One Ration Card. One Nation, One Ration Card. Because of, especially during these disasters, like pandemic situation, for the migrant labor, the One Nation, One Ration Card is highly useful. Wherever they are living, migrating, from there they can collect the entitlement of the ration from the public distribution system, because it is a subsidized price, subsidized food that is being given to the low income groups. That is another best practice. And then I have seen this recently, this passport, issuing of the passport. Here in Hyderabad, this Toli Chowki, there is a passport office that is very prompt, within short, just you can fill your application online, then they will allot the time slot, the date and time slot, straightway can go. It is just a matter of few minutes rather than standing in a big line. Earlier we used to do it in Secunderabad area, and then reaching to the applicant on time. That is all ensured. It's all been ensured. That is another best practice. Then we have seen this online admissions in the university as well as the online classes, especially during the serious crisis. This has been a facilitating instrument. Say, for example, this University Grants Commission program called SWAYAM, massive online open courses. The UGC has sponsored the academicians to generate knowledge in the form of videos as well as the soft copy of the material that has been uploaded in the UGC SWAYAM portal, and that material is being accessed by few lakhs of the students across the country. One video is being used by a few lakhs of students. That is by seen. That is biting rate indicating that a few lakhs of students have been utilizing that one faculty member preparing one video and then one lesson and uploaded on the UGC SWAYAM and accessible to a few lakhs of the students during the pandemic situation is one of the major best practice that has been emerging as a result of the e-governance intervention. Certainly, there are so many things have been there, but at the same time, as I like this concept, capabilities enhancement of the individuals and citizens as a entitled citizens, and but providing the infrastructure. Where from you will get the providing infrastructure, whether it is coming from the state, or is it from the corporate sector, or is it supposed to be generated by the community itself, is the very big question. So in order to reach it, because this e-governance is supposed to become a universal mechanism. It is supposed to be equally accessible to each and every citizen of whether this country or for that matter any other country, whether developed societies or developing societies or learning societies. It must be equally accessible to everyone. When there has been equal infrastructure for the equal accessibility of the whether it is a technology or capital or human capital, then where the question of this state patronage will not arise. Yes, we do agree that effective the new public management theory that has been advocating with 3 E's: efficiency, economy, and effectiveness. That is what everyone expecting, even the public sector also, in terms of delivering these services to the fragile areas, marginalized, excluded social groups. So that is the intention. Let all these best practices, whatever the results which have been coming as a result of experimenting or replication of the e-governance mechanism, let them be universally accessible to each and every citizen at wherever they are locating, whatever their location. That must be the objective, rather than you making it as an instrument for the making of the profits, or it is a instrument for the vote bank. So that is the intention. The service delivery must become the more important, rather than making profit or making it as a instrument for the vote bank. That is the critical issue. That is a critical issues which have been existing.
I think I'll just make one comment on a little bit on, so I don't know what you mean, Professor Venkatasu, by profit making. I've heard often that governments in Delhi are doing these, providing food to people at a cheaper cost. Everybody's, 5 rupee this, 10 rupee food, this, that, and all that. I've been often confused as to why. I mean, it is the same set of people who can start and provide extensive food and services. Countries like McDonald's have created these mammoth organizations. McDonald's, countries as USA, they created McDonald's, KFC. They were started by ordinary people. These ordinary people created these enterprises that are now going to different countries. They're in China, they're in India, they're in everywhere in the world. You see, there is a McDonald's. Why is not there a place that sells your, matar paneer and butter chicken or whatever it is that you make? I mean, if you continue to think that the governments will create these things, I don't know. Why should Delhi government be providing food at 6 rupees? What is the business of government to provide food? Why don't you say that we will build 50 companies that will cater to the food needs of Delhi? Why can't you support that interest? Everybody, government has to feed, government has to do this. I am worried 50 years down the line, what will government be doing? I would like to see 50 years down the line, there is a Indian aloo tikki corner in US or in China, and it is operating internationally, a chain of selling aloo tikki. Why should not that happen? And how will that happen? If the government continues its own idea, oh, we'll feed you, we'll feed you. I do that to my 5-year, 2-year kid, 3-year kid. Make him or her dependent. All his life, all our life, should be saying, yeah, you feed. We want to create these companies that will go and create their own capability to serve the world. They didn't regulate software. Infosys goes and has operations. I used to live in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I went to Walmart offices in Bentonville. They had the offices there. TCS has an office in Bentonville. We can prioritize a few things, But for other things, we just have an old school hangover some reason. We don't think that certain things can be done by people better. I don't understand this motivation to get into things that are none of our business. Ultimately, government is not some God's gift to a country. Government is people's own entity. And I think it should be done in a manner to make people grow and make them bigger. And the government has its own roles. It should very clearly say that. Digital is great, provide the basic services, offer the digital architecture, but try, for God's sake, they were running airlines and everything. Just try and think what you can do efficiently, and just focus on things that you should do efficiently, because ultimately the people of this country are very enterprising and powerful. They've gone all across the world. They will create many more companies. You talk about food, you talk about clothing, anything, they'll create everything. You just need to incentivize and let them do it, and just get out of the way in most places. Delhi is such a big, I don't know about Hyderabad, Delhi is such a big market, and they're selling those, I mean, I don't know if they're still doing it, but I read it a couple of years ago. They're selling food for very cheap to people all across. What's the business of that? You should have created 50 companies, 100 companies to meet Delhi's food needs, and make them do it. I mean, if they're competing, they'll do it in a manner that people are willing to buy, able to buy. Make them compete in that. It is the same group of people, they'll do stuff. But again, that's just my approach to thing is government should very clearly say what it is in the business of, and don't get into the business of people. They'll do it much better. They'll do it much efficiently. They have you support them where it is not. Provide them the finances, provide them the training. You mentioned SWAM, great platform. Let people come, let people learn, let people do what they want to do.
Thank you very much, Professor Pankaj. Just on that note, I would like to bring in Devashish. What do you think, Devashish? How does e-governance affect smaller businesses in a country like India? To the point, what Professor Pankaj has been talking about, right? Like, if you want to create an ecosystem which is very, very apt for businesses to just get in and start doing things, right? How does e-governance affect smaller businesses in a country like ours, and where the internet penetration is still somewhat, it's still not that great?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And as I get into that question, I think I just want to touch on what Professor Sethia mentioned, and I think I quite agree on him on his points that government's role has to increasingly be that of an enabler, less of a regulator. Unfortunately, we are seeing in every department, in every part, more and more regulators coming in, which is good to regulate, but one should not over-regulate things. And when you talk about small businesses, I would also look at startups to be small businesses, and startups need that kind of support and help to kind of get built. I keep hearing from my friends who run startups is that there are policies on paper to support startups very well, whether there are certain tax breaks and things like that. But the startups may not need some of those policies in the beginning few years because they are anyway not making money, right? What they need is the right kind of unshackling of a lot of regulations that bind them, and therefore allow them to prosper, support them, and let them do, let them be, and let them grow. And in the way we've seen some countries, even in Asia, like Singapore and all, have done, enable them. So I would say that should be the role of the government increasingly. Government should take special interest in working with these smaller businesses, because these are small businesses, and since we're talking to students, many of the students will get into that space. Innovation is very important in our market, and big companies unfortunately suffer a lot because big companies have also become bureaucratic, large, very long decision-making processes. But if we are enable smaller businesses to come in and innovate, that would be wonderful, and that's where the government's role should be. And wherever possible, government and larger businesses should come together and enable that to happen. In terms of your, what you mentioned about internet penetration, I think that's a matter of time. I think that should not be a reason to stop anything to happen. internet penetration is happening pretty fast in the country, and it will continue to happen. It cannot be a showstopper. And internet actually has enabled so many businesses. I mean, whether we talked about Zerodha just now and others, so many new businesses, particularly in the fintech space, have come up, which have taken the, which have used the support of internet and digital world. So I think we should, that should not be a showstopper. That's an enabler. That should continue to work. And we are now seeing in smaller towns. In fact, if you talk to people in Amazon and others, you will see that amongst the top cities where they sell, they may not be the Delhi and Mumbai and Bangalore and Hyderabad. They may be, from a per capita basis, they may be smaller cities. And I remember being visiting Pilani once, BITS Pilani, and I was told that that the number of packets that the parcels that Amazon delivers, even in a city like Pilani, is mind-boggling. So these are enablers, and I don't think internet is stopping some of them to happen, and this will continue to grow. But more importantly, I think small businesses should be supported by the government by taking away as many regulations as possible, but in turn supported by fiscal support and other supports that will enable them to grow. And not only just the first 3 years, because a lot of these startups can kind of tide through first 3 years, but then when they come into their next phase, that's when they need the real support. For companies to, like Professor Sethia said, for companies to grow beyond boundaries, they will need that kind of support and push and help to kind of do that. So I'll pause here.
Thank you, Devashish. So we're reaching the conclusion of the panel, and I request the panelists to kind of I request you for your final thoughts on the matter, and maybe we could start with Professor Venkatesu.
Yes, enabling environment providing to the every citizen is the need of the hour. At the same time, the government has been downsizing itself, whether it is from the public investment point of view or whatever the public undertakings which are there under the public sector are being privatized, corporatized. See, in a multi-party electoral context, the constitution has been ensuring the certain rights and entitlements to each and every citizen in this country. And the citizen is also aspiring to claim those rights and entitlements. So therefore, what is it that alternative model that has been existing? State has all since 1990s in the process of globalization, privatization, and liberalization. It has been privatizing the economy. That has been a process, at least for the last 3 decades. It has been going on. Maximum percentage of the public sector has been privatized already. But where is the alternative model? What is the option that has been existing for the poorest of the poor people in this country, to the excluded people or marginalized? Is the one best way, one question that has been there. But whether this e-governance, is it reaching to the such type of people? That is my concern. My concern is that one. Yes, certainly the privileged sections have been enjoying the kind of facilities which are being extended through the innovations, e-governance, scientific advancements, information and communication technology advancement, digital advancement, or even artificial intelligence and machine learning. But this should be accessible to everyone. Yes, everyone must be enabled. Enabling environment must be created. Let everyone must become an entrepreneur. Let everyone become an industrialist or businessman. But is there such an environment for every citizen in this country, every social group in this country? Is the basic concern. Who are the people who have been suffering from the poverty? Who are the people who have been excluded from the social process and social stigma? So these are the kind of situation that has been existing. Yes, you are using the e-governance for the business purpose, industry purpose, commercial purpose, it is fine. But at the same time, welfare aspect that has been there, still it has not eradicated, erosion from the Indian Constitution that has been assured, which has emerged as a result of the Indian national movement. The Indian national movement assured towards the people of this country that it is going to reduce the poverty, reduce the backwardness, and it is going to put one of the most advanced country in the country. Problems of all sets of communities will be resolved. But if it is so, then why the level of the poverty and backwardness has been existing in this country? Why time and again the distress has been coming up, dissatisfaction has been coming up? That needs to be, when some will have to look at it from the empathy point of view, understanding from the community point of view, and providing some sort of a effective solution to their problem is the need of the hour in this process of what is entire this, at least this globalization process, integration with the world capitalist world.
Thank you so much, Professor Venkateshu. For bringing in the idea of empathy as well. That's something that probably we should aspire for. Professor Pankaj Sethia, concluding remarks, please.
I think a lot of good ideas have been discussed. I agree with a lot of what Professor Venkateshu was saying, and I think I would slightly differentiate that government should become more intelligent, which means it should focus very clearly on things that it should do. Professor Venkateshu said, some sort of made this that private sector and all that. I don't think our private sector is good enough, to be frank. I don't think we are very good in even private enterprises. So they have to work hard. The things that we are most proud of, IT services company, they don't get the most challenging things. They're not doing the most cutting edge in most of the cases. No, they're given tasks that are, on the left out. So somehow feeling we are doing this, we are doing that, capitalism. I'm not very excited about any of these. So they need to do a lot better as well. I haven't seen any Elon Musk yet from India who's developing products and challenging the way things work and developing products around it which go around the globe. I already said I haven't seen that in the food industry, somebody building chains and restaurants across the world. I haven't seen anything big to say that Indian capitalism or Indian businesses or anything is a great state already. So I'm not satisfied with that part. Regarding government, I think government should be very clear. You have to create a healthy population. So healthcare has to be important. You have to create an educated population. And on that, Professor Venkateshu's comments are very good. It's very starkly different when I see workers in US. I lived there 17 years, so it comes very starkly to me, very sharply to me, because I don't see, if I see people working here on the roadside in construction, I sometimes feel like, why are they even picking the shovel? They're so weak sometimes. They're not looking at very strong and they're digging and all. If you look comparatively, people in West, they're not weak by any standard of physically, which means that the construction work is an activity that is incentivized, and that says a lot about the private as well as the government. You have to focus very sharply. If anybody is giving or doing work, give them the respect, give them the kind of facilities that they would become better, prosperous. There has to be you have to think as a government, the goal has to be very clear, not doing all these other things that, I don't know, when I'm providing food, I'm kitchen chalayenge. What is this? What is this waste of time you're in? You should focus very clearly. Your goal is to help people become better, prosperous, richer, healthier, more educated. That's the only focus to do. Your focus is to prevent. Your focus is not to decide the price of chapatis and stuff like. I mean, you can do that if you have to regular. I mean, there is something very wrong going on. What's wrong right now that you have to do? Chapati pricing. People will figure out how much money they have, how much they want to pay for it. What is the business of government? Let people build businesses, provide them cheaper, whatever it is. I don't know where that whole thing, kind of being a Robin Hood and all those things. Why? These are our own people. But I think government, if it has to do, it has to very clear. Digital technologies are great, powerful, AI, analytics, everything. You have great powers at hand. You have great capabilities at hand. None of that will be effective if you don't have your focus great and correct as well. The focus of the government, pick a few areas. And more than the government, I don't even tell government is wrong. I'm saying people have to recalibrate their own expectations. there are a lot of those listeners here in your panel here who are listening to me. I would say you should demand that's what you want. Why do you have to demand government to do this thing for me, this thing to me, and then appreciate all the things? No, you should aspire to be the best and the brightest and build the best and the brightest, which we are not there yet. And I think that's what you should focus on. Let government deal with problems of healthcare. There are a lot of people who are malnutrition. There are a lot of people who don't have basic education. Government should do that. Government's job is doing that. That's what you ask them to do. But ask them to focus it right. Ask them to focus on the right places and build the things that are indigenous. Let people grow healthy. Let people grow educated. Let people become more capable. They'll create the world for themselves. That's what my ultimate thoughts would be. But it was very nice talking to everyone. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Pankaj Sethia. I mean, very high clarity as well as inspiring words for our students as well. Thank you so much. Devashish, can you, I would like you to kind of draw this to a close as well as share your concluding remarks.
Thanks so much. And I think, I would say that, while the government should move away from regulating businesses, regulating, other things as much as possible, but at the same time, that's government's role also to ensure that there is proper, order in the society, and to that extent that would happen. My concluding point would be really that there has to be an environment of trust amongst all the stakeholders. So I see increasingly that there is trust deficit, whether vis-a-vis one part of the government versus either business or society or others. Now that trust deficit is there. That trust can be built through more collaborations, more conversations, and in that process, government can kind of understand where they need to focus and what they need to do. So therefore, whether it's inside business or with government, to my mind, trust building is going to be very, very important to enable the society to move forward and economy to move forward and businesses to thrive, small business to come by, and everybody having a voice in a manner that voice is responsible and work goes towards driving something positive for the society. So I would really say that I really thank you and thank everybody, my esteemed panelists. Really excited to be here, and I'm sure many of the students who are here are all budding entrepreneurs in many ways. An entrepreneur doesn't necessarily mean they have to be in profit-making businesses. Today is the world of social entrepreneurship, and I think that's an area where I think that's a lot of work can be done and should be done. So my best wishes to everybody in the school here, and to all of you, thank you once again.
Thank you, Devashish, and thanks to Professor Pankaj Sethia and Professor Venkatesu for really informative, critical, inspiring remarks on the topic of today's panel, e-governance for effective governments. I really appreciate the fact that you kind of spoke about e-government, but you also spoke about the nature or an aspiration one could have for government as a concept itself. So thank you very much. And thanks to EPS and the students and the audience for listening. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, sir. I mean, we can take I think we can take only one question from the audience since we're running out of time. So if anybody do have questions, could you please raise your hands? Yes, Ainesh.
Yes, thank you. So the discussion was very insightful. So I just wanted to ask a question. So We need a feedback framework so that the government can work with small businesses, as Professor Dasgupta was telling. But here is where I feel there should be a certain government regulation. I'm not able to draw the boundary. So, for example, let us take for example, the government should not just facilitate an environment of innovation, but should also do so in the right direction. So if a new business wants to start a steel factory at this point in time, it will be profitable to them because India's steel reliance is increasing and is predicted to increase a lot till 2050. But the new steel industry would most likely use the traditional approaches to make steel, thus increasing the reliance on coal and electricity. So private sector time and again would choose profits over social value. So the government should maybe provide incentives to use renewable energy, as no one else would be able to do so. So if there is less regulation in this case, a free hand is given to businesses, and businesses will prioritize profit over everything. So my question is, if this is a boundary that the government should regulate, then where exactly should we draw a boundary and how should we do so?
Anish,
I think any one of you can.
So I don't have the data to comment on the specific aspect that you are asking me to comment, but broadly, one of the things I would highlight is profit and social value should not be disconnected for a long period of time. And I think that's where you are indicating that renewal and all that would help fix that disconnect. Having said that, I would also underline that profit, an organization making profit is socially valuable thing to do. And I think we should understand that and underline that very clearly. A lot of, if we are thinking from a private perspective, profit and social value, and this is a big chasm. I think part of it is because we come from a historical background where private corporations were all evil. Well, the government was also evil at that time, right? It was also not our government. So there is a lot of that mistrust or everything built into the system. I think we should just move on with that fact that any organization that exists, and if it is allowed to exist, that is because it creates public and social value. Otherwise, it's a bad thing and it shouldn't happen for too long. Right? So I think in an idealistic sense, organizing is an activity that individuals are allowed to do because it is good for that particular country, company, whatever. Now that good, bad discerning becomes very tricky. If you are using renewable energy and creating products that people are using every day in and day out, there is value created. If they are using even environmental destructing fuels, let's say. Now, if we come up with a new technology and we have to force it, then surely there are ways to incentivize it, and we see that there is more social value here, there. Then all those discussions can happen, and the moment you have those discussions, then you can incentivize and all that. Now, like I said, I don't have the data to exactly comment on this, when and how should it happen. But I think keeping that framework in mind, that if a new technology comes and it is going to be valuable, then there are ways to incentivize it. I think the electric vehicles do not face, they don't need the registration cost, and there are many other incentives that are already given for that. I think that's the way to do it. You don't have to regulate, but you can incentivize other energies to be competitive, fuel the competitive forces in the economy, and that will ultimately make the other industry win. I think that's probably the way to do it, is somehow incentivize others. The way to make one line smaller is to draw a line next to it that is bigger. And that, I think, is a better way to do things, because ultimately public would have their own understanding on what is right and wrong. And so I think you trust that, and then the government aids, like I said, when there is a collective good, environment is one such. If you find that's being polluted, then we'll think about it. But in general, I think that rule of profit and social value should not be disconnected for too long. Only a new technology makes that link happen to be different. So if there is a possibility to use renewables, that's a new technology. But in general, that link should not be epitomized in our brains.
Thank you, Professor.
If I know we are way past time, but if the panelists are willing, we can just take one more question. Okay,
Sure.
Hari, last question. Please unmute yourself. Okay, we'll move on to Madhur.
Yes. My question would be that bringing every government department under one framework using technology can reduce working in the silos. But how much is the cost justified? Because it would involve updating all the legacy systems and integrating so many departments which might be functioning under national or state level.
Do you want me to reply?
Yes, sir.
It is not merely just bringing together all the departments into a single window, but here my view is that convergence at the institution level, convergence at the resource level, and convergence of the ideas. The entire convergence process is for the building of social, human, physical, natural, and finance capital in order to empower the citizen, in order to empower the society, civil society at large. So that the institutional convergence, ideas convergence, and resource convergence is towards the empowerment of the society at large and then individuals in specific. Yeah.
Okay, we'll close the session now. Thanks a lot, Dr. Deepak. Thanks a lot, Professor Pankaj, Professor Venkatesu, and Devashish sir. It has been great interacting with you all, and this has. I hope it has been as much learning as it was for me to everybody else on the session today as well. Thank you so much, and we have 2 other panel discussions lined up for tomorrow. Please do visit us then as well. We've had we have shared the schedule over mail and over our social media handles. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish.